Hello. So I'm going to be doing a screencast, and I'm kind of going to be combining my answers for questions 1 and 3 for the five question reflection assignment, just for the sake of time. And a lot of what I'm going to say overlaps with the two. So for question 1, when I have to talk about some of the leaderships, concepts, models, and techniques that I learned about, what did I know before, and then how has the week's experiences contributed to my deeper understanding. A lot of that is going to overlap with the readings and my key insights. So I wanted to just start off with the Harvard Business Review. As far as leaderships, tools, and concepts, before I really didn't know that there was a process to making leadership decisions. In my head, whenever I thought of leadership, I automatically thought of experience, and I would think of someone that has been doing a job for 20 years and then they get a promotion. Um, and I always assumed that leadership was something that you worked towards. But I now understand my own role as a leader and as a teacher that just finished her first year teaching. So, the model that makes the most sense to me in regards to leadership is Carter's 8 steps, which is outlined in this Harvard Business Review. On page 2, there's a connection that I want to make. So it says, a paralyzed senior management often comes from having too many managers and not enough leaders. So this directly relates to the Providence school system right now and what's going on there. So I don't know if you've seen on the news, but when they talk about it, they say that there's too many cooks in the kitchen. That to me, when I read that sentence, I automatically thought of that. And just in relation to Carter's model, how there's a difference between managing and leading. Um, and then a lot of what is mentioned about successful leadership overlaps with what successful teachers do. So that was something that really stood out to me too. So on page 5, just gonna grab this. It says, in more successful transformation efforts, executives use all existing communication channels to broadcast the vision. They turn boring, unread company newsletters into lively articles about the vision. They take ritualistic, tedious quarterly management meetings and turn them into exciting discussions of the transformation. As I read that, I thought of actually teaching. Like if you are a good teacher and if you were to go into a successful teacher's classroom, whatever you're teaching is going to be overlapped in every single subject, every single day, and it's going to be consistent. Um, so I saw that connection between successful leadership and successful teaching. And then they also talk a lot about fake speed, and I connected to that because I think, especially in public school at the primary level, we see a lot of that with technology. So you'll see like a quick push for integrating technology into the classroom, but we are skipping the essential steps in order to get there successfully. So, like, we talked a lot about this at the Institute too, but like handing a kid an iPad that does nothing. I mean, it's if you're not purposeful in it, if you're not, you don't give them the explicit instruction that they need, then there's no point in doing it. Um, so those were some of the key findings from this article. So I wanted to move on to the second article. So in this article, Thinking by Tim Brown, a lot of this connected to myself and my own thinking. So before the Institute and before my learning, I always knew that I had a practical mindset. And as I read this, I thought of the compass activity. I'm such an East, I'm such a holistic thinker. And I feel like that directly relates to this article and this mindset, this design thinking. And I've always thought that about myself, but I've never talked about it. I just always thought like if you were a good teacher, you think this way. And like, what's the point in talking about it? but the point in talking about it, I now understand, is that not everyone thinks that way. Um, and a lot of what Tim Brown talks about is like metacognition, which is something that in my undergrad as a teacher we learn. You need to be talking about your thinking. You need to be and with ESL metalinguistics, it's the same thing. So I talked last week at the Institute a lot about how I just personally think that we make teaching and learning way more complicated than it has to be. And there was a quote in this article by Tim Brown that directly related to my thinking at that time. And it's funny because I read this after I said that, obviously, but it was on page 86. I'm just going to go to it quickly. It said, Edison's approach was an early example of what is now called design thinking, a methodology that imbues the full spectrum of innovation activities with a human-centered design ethos. By this, I mean that innovation is powered by a thorough understanding, through direct observation, of what people want and need in their lives and what they like or dislike about the particular way products are made, packaged, sold, and supported. And that just like literally related directly to that quote. So when I read that, I immediately thought back to when I said that, because it didn't really make sense to me when I was saying it. Like I just like was saying that we make things way more complicated than they have to be. And then I read that and I was like, oh my God, wow. And then so I really thought that the nursing example was really interesting, because I would never think there would be an overlap between like education and nursing. Um, but I feel like as I read the nursing example, it really demonstrated what we lack in education. So like a lot of times we ask for feedback, we'll take surveys about our school and our leadership, and the kids and the parents will take their surveys, and we'll collect this data, but then we won't really do anything about it. So the nursing example kind of just demonstrated we may ask for feedback, but if we don't follow through with it, then what was the point of asking in the first place? So in the nursing example, they talked about how much time is lost between shift changes, and they talked to the patients about it. So like in a school setting, that could be the teachers. And then they collected that data and they acted on it. So like they'll ask teachers their opinions a lot of time, but they won't act on it. So I thought that that was like kind of an interesting point. And as I read this article, I also thought of Charlie's teaching and the connection I made to leadership. So we learned a lot about being transparent and, being transparent as a leader. And that literally is describing design thinking. So Warwick Public Schools also, I wanted to just mention, has a design thinking studio. So if you've never been, you should definitely go and try to check it out. It's really cool. Also, there was an overlap with the inspiration phase and the tools that we learned about. So on page 89, it says, during the inspiration phase, an interdisciplinary team of IDEO and Shimano people, designers, behavioral scientists, marketers, and engineers work to identify appropriate constraints for the project. That's literally like the force field analysis and what we do when we're planning in our preparation. And then with the bike example, it also goes back to the idea of education, and especially in digital literacy. So in the bike example, they talked about people being really intimidated and just wanting simplicity. And I feel like that's digital literacy in school. A lot of teachers are intimidated by it, and they want a simple way to integrate it and use it. And then just in the last paragraph, it relates to encouraging the heart. As I read this part, I literally thought that's right where my mind went. So they say that these problems all have people at their heart. They require a human-centered, creative, and practical approach to finding the best ideas and ultimate solutions. Design thinking is such an approach to innovation. So yeah, just as we say, like encouraging the heart, like in my management plan, my change plan, I say like I'm going to encourage the heart by bringing it back to the kids. It's the same thing. It all overlaps, of course, across so many different surfaces. And then just some key points and insight from the distributed leadership article. So that was mostly about focusing on learning rather than teaching, facilitation, and how this relates to new ideas and wider perspectives, and then providing direction. So much of what I read in this article relates directly to myself in the classroom. It also relates to my plan. So my plan was DLI programming in general. That pretty much directly relates to the facilitation part. So the DLI programming, it is trying to speed cultural competence, which, this article talks a lot about gaining new ideas and wider perspectives and why kids need to do that and why we need to teach kids how to do that with constraints. And that was just an overlap I had, like, oh, that's one of the main reasons why I would want to push for DLI, for global awareness and, culturally creating kids that to be culturally competent. So for question number 2, much of what I learned about leadership is what I will apply in my workplace, but also especially in my teaching. The British Journal of Educational Technology talks about facilitation and direction with technology in the classroom. We want kids to have authentic experiences with the digital world. Similarly, we need to give kids practice and explicit instruction on how to be leaders and interact with others. This is a major issue in schools. We expect kids to know how to respect their teachers and classmates, but many do not. We expect kids to know how to navigate an iPad, but many do not know how to do so purposefully. Everything I learned and read about will directly impact my instruction as mentioned on page 934. In the wake of new technologies, it is unlikely that traditional patterns of leadership will prove adequate to meet the new challenges. Hence, it is imperative that leadership is conceptualized and understood as generating and transferring knowledge, trust, and a shared purpose in a distributed way. I believe that this must start at the primary level, and that is the way that we will create a better future. So for number 4, now that I've had this professional development experience, I see my leadership role in 2 places. As mentioned previously, I see my role directly in the classroom and classroom instruction as well as in my building. It is easy to have an idea and run with it. I think this PD allowed me to understand there is a process that is going to take time and I must nurture that process. And finally, if I had one more day at the Institute, I would like to learn more about leadership tools. I liked being able to try out and practice what we were learning about. For example, when we did the 6-minute exercise or completing the stakeholder analysis, I loved practicing those. I will leverage my PD network and new digital literacies to check in with and update my peers. I think having access to go back to the Google Sites will be helpful to me when I need to see an example of something. I, of course, have exchange numbers, and I cannot wait to check in with my peers. Thank you.